This video isn't really for people who are fine with any kind of change. But if you're the sort of person who gets a little bit downhearted when you lose a job or end a relationship, you might want to stick around for a minute. If your upbringing or your schooling was in a European-centered culture, there's a very good chance that you were never taught how to process change. In fact, I think they go the opposite way. I'm willing to bet that there are kings and patriarchy to thank for all of that. That means that you and me, many years later, struggle anytime we hit change. My name is Simpson, and I'm a minister in the United Church of Canada. One of the things that I have learned through many years of walking with people through change in their lives, especially the sorts of change that involve the ending of something. Often it's the end of a loved one's life, or maybe it's the end of a relationship, or losing a job, or even a significant change in a way of life. We are all saddled with grief that we don't know how to process. Grief is most frequently attached to losing somebody that we love or somebody who is very close to us. But there is so much other grief going on in our lives, and we've generally been taught not to talk about it, to push it down, to cover it up. And this strikes me as really strange because Christianity has a deep tradition of processing grief in very healthy ways. In the Bible, there's an entire book called Lamentations, and it is the process of how we work through lament. This is something that has been part of Christian tradition for a lot of years. Now, due to my own background, schooling, and profession, of course I'm going to look at this from the Christian standpoint, but we do not have a corner on this market at all. Buddhists have a deep conversation about addressing and acknowledging grief and pain, and that's an important part of steps towards enlightenment. And as I've learned a little bit more about the indigenous cultures that existed here in North America long before Europeans ever arrived, they have deep, meaningful community practices of grief and mourning. They were important parts of how the community and the individual stayed healthy, stayed safe, and addressed the realities of the world that they saw around them. Across all of these cultures, one of the most common things we see is that it's important to name our pain, to address that not everything is okay, that it's okay to be not okay. Now, I can only speak to my experience growing up as a straight white English-speaking man in Canada, but oh my goodness, we are not encouraged to share our feelings. Pretend everything is fine. Don't cry even if you've been hurt physically or emotionally. Take all of that pain, pretend it doesn't exist, and move on with your life. Stiff upper lip. Any of that conversation is toxic. So what might it look like to you to process your pain in healthy ways? If we look in the Bible at the Psalms or at Lamentations, very often the expressing of pain, the working through of grief, is a very active thing and leads to hope. Do you have a place or a person who is safe for you to share what you're working through? Some of us just call this venting, and that is a healthy thing, as long as it doesn't become the only thing you do with that friend or that safe space. I process a lot of things out loud. Now, I know that's not for everybody, but when I say something, it becomes very real in ways where if it was just in my head, it didn't have that same tangibility. So when I talk through and explain out loud the pain I'm feeling, the stuff I'm struggling with, even if it's a good change that I'm processing through, like I got a kid who has just gone away to post-secondary education. That is a good change. It's wonderful. It's marvelous. And I miss him being at home. I need to be able to process that and speak through it. And that can lead to healthy change. Like, what am I going to do about it? These are all things that can change and help me process through the grief that I'm experiencing because of this transition. Of course, not all changes or transitions have as much of a positive root as that one does. What if the transition you're going through also takes away your ability to process out loud? Perhaps there is a transition in your job. You've now gone up a level, your pay raise has gone up, and you've got a bigger office. But now the person you used to hang out with and chat with and be able to share some stuff, well, they're in a different office now and you can't chat with them. Sometimes the transitions we're going through are actually the source of difficulty around processing the grief itself. Or the more obvious example, what if you've just ended a relationship, or it was ended on you and you didn't really have a choice in the matter? You are hurting, you are trying to work through your own grief, you're questioning yourself, you're questioning them, and they were probably the one that you would have run this all by. You can't go to them with your feelings, they're no longer part of it, and the feelings are about them. But I think these are cases where we need to step away from our very individualistic culture and behave more like humans have for a lot more generations and a lot more years. Every culture throughout time has always had some way of defining beginnings and ends, of celebrating, of marking, of grieving, of speaking, of working through them. Now, most frequently, this relates to funerals, or marking deaths, or celebrating the end of a life and the beginning of a new one. Every culture in human history has always done that. When we look at archaeological digs, drawings and inscriptions, we've got pottery and obelisks, we've got sculptures that show us that beginnings and endings got marked. Maybe it was the beginning of a season of harvest. Maybe it was the end of this king being the leader and the beginning of that king. The beginnings and endings have always been a critically important part of who we as humans have processed out loud and together. So let's not make this about faith or culture. Let's make this about you and me and the rest of the world admitting that everything's not awesome. That there are times that are really hard, even if they're hard and good. And also the fact that if we're going through hard stuff, we're allowed to go through it. That it's mentally healthy, that it's spiritually good to address this out loud, to say the things that hurt and to get through them. Now, you might be the sort of person who really struggles to say that out loud, and that also is okay. But it doesn't mean you can't write it down. So my encouragement or my challenge to you is get it out one way or another. Find somebody who you can be vulnerable with and share that. And maybe that needs to be a therapist or a spiritual director or a faith healer. It doesn't have to be a best friend. Sometimes they're not ready to hear your stuff, or maybe your pain is the same as theirs and they can't process it with you. But you don't have to do this alone. The world is full of people and places and ways that you can get some of this out, so it's not all sitting deep and dark and angry inside of you. So write something down. Tell a friend. Get some of this out. Admit that you're hurting. Lament. Face the pain head on. Do it in little bits at first because it can be really hard. But I promise you that if you are willing and able to start to talk about and to process all of the grief that's in your life, at least a couple of things are going to happen. One, you're going to feel like you're getting somewhere. Now, some days that will be 2 steps ahead and 14 steps back, but don't negate those 2 steps ahead. 2, you're going to realize that you're actually processing a lot more grief than you thought you were. And that might be the time that you need to work with a professional who can work with you through it. And 3, you're going to see life in a slightly better way. Now, I'm not one of these toxic positivity people who says, oh, look it, you get 3 steps and everything's perfect. No, it's actually probably going to get harder in some ways. But slowly and surely and over time, you're going to practice the art of processing aloud the things that you're struggling with. That is lament. Addressing the pain, talking about it, sharing it, writing it down, processing it. I hope that this is something that makes a difference in your life, because we all need it. Our lives are hard and complicated, even if it seems like they're wonderful and great. It turns out they can be all those things at the same time. Friends, I hope that you find a way to process through some of the stuff that's really got you tied up inside. Touch little pieces of it at first, peel back little layers, until by one you realize that you can make headway. You can become a slightly better version of you. You can carry slightly less weight with you every single day. I love you all. I hope that this makes a small difference in your life. See you in the next one. Bye for now.